The emergency alarms screamed across the Galactic Council headquarters as another bright dot vanished from the star map. Ambassador Cathara stared at the massive holographic display, watching in horror as an entire solar system simply ceased to exist, gone, just like that. Billions of lives erased in seconds. The council chamber buzzed with panicked voices from 47 different alien species. Some clicked their mandibles nervously, others flapped wing-like appendages in distress. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the mix of different atmospheric requirements as fear filled the room. Order! Order! The council speaker slammed his ceremonial staff against the marble floor. His 6 eyes surveyed the chaos before him. We must face reality. The Void Swarm has consumed 12 entire sectors in just 12 days. Cathara felt her 3 hearts beating rapidly. The Void Swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. These weren't ordinary invaders seeking territory or resources. They were machines, ancient and hungry, that devoured everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire civilizations. Nothing survived their advance. Our most advanced weapons are useless, continued the speaker. The swarm adapts faster than we can modify our technology. Every time we think we've found a weakness, they evolve past it within hours. A hologram showed the swarm's latest attack. Metallic creatures the size of cities tore through space fleets like paper. Their dark holes absorbed energy weapons and reflected particle beams. When the aliens tried physical projectiles, the swarm grew armor. When they used electromagnetic pulses, the machines developed immunity. How long do we have? Asked General Vexter from the Military Council. The speaker's expression grew even grimmer. Our computers estimate 3 weeks before they reach the core worlds. Maybe 4 if we sacrifice the outer colonies. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of translation devices. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat frozen, knowing their civilizations faced extinction. Cathara's mind raced back to her academy days, studying ancient galactic history. She remembered dusty old files about primitive species that had failed to integrate with galactic society. Most had gone extinct or retreated to isolated worlds, but one group had simply vanished completely after being rejected by the council. Wait, she said softly, then louder. Wait, there might be something. All eyes turned to her. Cathara accessed her personal data pad, fingers flying across the holographic interface as she searched through archived databases that hadn't been touched in centuries. The humans, she whispered, then spoke up. The humans had an emergency protocol. Laughter erupted from several representatives. Humans, scoffed admirals, those barely civilized creatures who couldn't even maintain proper diplomatic relations. They disappeared 300 years ago because they couldn't handle real civilization. But Cathara kept searching. There it was, buried in subsection 447 of the historical archives. The Human Last Hope Frequency, a communication protocol they'd established before their diplomatic expulsion from galactic society. They were primitive, yes, Cathara admitted, but they left this emergency beacon in our systems before they vanished. A way to contact them if the galaxy ever faced total destruction. The laughter grew louder and more bitter. Several representatives made dismissive gestures with tentacles and claws. Then another star system winked out on the display. The laughter died instantly. The heated debate raged for 3 hours in the council chambers. Military advisors argued against wasting precious time on what they called desperate fantasy. Scientists insisted their resources would be better spent on evacuation plans. But, as another system disappeared from the star map, Council Chairman Velthor made his decision. We authorize the transmission, he announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. The chairman's weathered face showed the strain of watching his civilization crumble. If we are destined to be the last generation of galactic civilization, history will not record that we ignored any chance of survival, no matter how remote. Admiral Zexon stood up abruptly, his scaled hide flushing with anger. This is madness. We're wasting time sending messages to ghosts. The humans vanished because they couldn't handle real space travel. Half their colonies failed within decades of establishment, but the decision was made. Cathara found herself walking toward the ancient communication array, her hands trembling as she accessed protocols that hadn't been used since her grandmother's generation. The human communication system was crude by galactic standards. No quantum entanglement, no subspace channels, just old-fashioned electromagnetic signals that crawled through space at light speed. The coding process was surprisingly complex. Humans had layered their emergency frequency with multiple encryption methods and verification protocols. As Cathara worked, she began to realize these weren't the systems of a primitive species. The mathematical principles were elegant, efficient, and remarkably sophisticated. Strange, she muttered, comparing the human protocols to modern galactic standards. These algorithms are actually more secure than our current methods. She crafted the message carefully, knowing it might be the galaxy's final communication. The words had to be simple enough for any species to understand, yet urgent enough to convey the desperate situation. Ancient enemy approaches. 12 sectors. Consumed. Weapons ineffective. Coordinates attached. Any assistance welcomed. The message was pathetically short compared to typical galactic diplomatic communications, which often ran thousands of pages with proper ceremony and protocol. This was just 27 words that carried the weight of 47 civilizations around her. Council members watched with mixtures of hope and skepticism. Some prayed to their various gods, while others calculated evacuation routes. The transmission began its journey, bouncing from relay station to relay station, each jump carrying it further toward the galactic rim, where humanity had last been detected. "How long until it reaches the outer systems?" asked Chairman Velther. Checked her calculations. 6 days to reach the furthest human colonies on record. "But sir, those records are 3 centuries old. There's no guarantee anyone is still out there to receive it." The beacon pulsed steadily, carrying its desperate plea into the darkness between stars. Each pulse represented trillions of lives hanging in the balance, waiting for an answer that might never come. Meanwhile, the tactical displays showed the Void Swarm's inexorable advance. System after system fell silent as the ancient machines devoured everything in their path. The galaxy's greatest military minds had failed to slow them even slightly. All they could do now was wait and hope that, somewhere in the vast darkness, humanity was still listening. Lieutenant Commander Jin was halfway through his morning coffee when the communication array lit up like a festival display. After 12 years of monitoring the empty void beyond the galactic rim, he'd grown used to the endless silence. The most exciting thing that usually happened was a stray meteorite hitting their sensors. But this was different. The signal pattern made his hands shake as he set down his cup. These weren't random space noises or natural phenomena. This was the Zenthari emergency frequency, a communication protocol he'd only seen in training simulations. Jin's fingers flew across the control panel, his heart racing as he tried to isolate the signal. The transmission was weak, having traveled across thousands of light years, but the encryption was unmistakably alien. More specifically, it was unmistakably Council. "Admiral Hyan to the bridge. Priority 1, he called through the stations. "Communication system." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nervousness. Admiral Hyan arrived within minutes, still carrying the fleet deployment reports she'd been reviewing in her quarters. At 55, she was one of the youngest admirals in human space, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd spent decades preparing for a war that might never come. "What do we have, Jin?" she asked, settling into the command chair. "Signal. From Galactic Core, ma'am. Zenthari emergency frequency. The computers are still working on translation, but..." Jin hesitated. "Admiral, this is the first communication we've received from Council space in over 300 years. The translation program finished its work, and the message played through the bridge speakers. The artificial voice was emotionless, but the words themselves carried desperate urgency. Ancient enemy approaches. 12 sectors consumed. Weapons ineffective. Any assistance welcomed. Hyun listened in complete silence, her expression growing darker with each word. When the message finished, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a long moment. "The Void Swarm," she said quietly. "It's finally happening." Jin had heard the stories, read the classified reports, but part of him had always hoped they were wrong. For 3 centuries, human scientists had tracked the swarm's movement through deep space, watching as it slowly approached the populated galaxy. Their computer models had predicted this exact scenario. "Orders, Admiral?" Jin asked. Haeon stood up, her decision already made. "Forward this message to High Command immediately. Full priority encryption, and Jin." She walked to the observation window, looking out at the vast construction yards that surrounded their hidden station. Massive ships hung in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. "Yes, ma'am? Send a general alert to all fleet commanders. Full mobilization protocols are now in effect." Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and determination. "Our 300 years of exile are about to end." The message began racing through humanity's secret network, jumping from hidden relay to hidden relay. In 50 different star systems that the galaxy had forgotten existed, alarm klaxons began to sound as human colonies received news that would change everything. The time for hiding was over. The emergency hologram flickered too. Life in the Grand Assembly Hall of New Terra, humanity's hidden capital deep in uncharted space. Admiral Tay stood at the center podium, surrounded by the ghostly blue images of colony leaders, fleet commanders, and civilian representatives from across 50 star systems. Each face showed the same mixture of shock and grim determination. The hall itself was a marvel of human engineering, carved from the heart of a massive asteroid and hidden behind layers of stealth technology that had kept them invisible for 3 centuries. Crystal formations in the walls caught and amplified the holographic displays, creating an almost mystical atmosphere for this historic moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Tay began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. 6 hours ago, we received a distress signal from the Galactic Council. The same council that voted us out of civilized space 300 years ago, with the declaration that humans were too primitive and violent for their advanced society. Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Some faces showed anger, others sadness, but all showed the weight of old wounds that had never fully healed. Captain Wu of the Third Fleet was the first to speak, his image standing tall despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. "Admiral, with respect, we all remember why we left. They called us barbarians, said our military thinking was crude, and our diplomatic methods were unsuitable for civilized beings. They voted to expel humanity from their precious council because we didn't fit their idea of proper civilization." His words struck a chord with many in the assembly. Humanity's exile hadn't been voluntary, they'd been forced out, told they were unwelcome among the galaxy's advanced species. The pain of that rejection had driven them to the furthest reaches of space, where they'd built their own civilization, in secret. "And now they want our help," continued Captain Wu. "Now that their advanced weapons and superior technology have failed them, they remember the primitive humans. Why should we risk our people's lives for those who abandoned us, Commander?" Yuna's image flickered as she leaned forward, her face intense with conviction. "Because that's exactly what makes us human, Captain. We don't abandon people to die just because they hurt our feelings. When someone is drowning, you don't check their resume before throwing them a rope." The debate that followed was fierce but respectful. Representative Kim from the New Seoul colony argued about the practical dangers of revealing their hidden fleets. Commander Park worried about the cost in human lives. Others questioned whether humanity owed anything to the galaxy that had rejected them. But underneath all the arguments, everyone in that chamber knew what the real answer was. It had never really been in doubt. Humanity had spent 3 centuries building and preparing, not for conquest or revenge, but for the day when they might be needed. When Admiral Tay called for the vote, the response was swift and unanimous. 47 colonies, 12 fleet commands, and 38 civilian sectors all voted the same way. Humanity would answer the call. The war preparations began immediately. The space around Kepler's Gate was a graveyard of twisted metal and dying ships. Admiral Zexon watched his tactical display with growing despair as the last of his fleet limped toward what he knew would be their final battle. The Void Swarm had cornered them perfectly, cutting off all escape routes with their massive dark vessels. "Sir, we're detecting hyperspace distortions," reported his communications officer, her voice barely steady. "Multiple contacts coming in fast." Zexon's heart sank. More swarm reinforcements would end this quickly. He was about to order his remaining ships to ram the enemy when something impossible appeared on his screens. The new arrivals weren't the familiar black hulks of the Void Swarm. These ships were sleek, silver, and moving in formations he'd never seen before. "Unknown vessels, identify yourselves immediately," Zexon transmitted, his voice carrying both desperation and confusion. "This is Admiral Zexon of the Galactic Defense Force. We are engaged with hostile forces." The response came in perfectly clear Galactic Standard, but the accent was unlike anything in the Council databases. "This is Admiral Minho of the Human Expeditionary Force. We received your distress call." The bridge fell silent. Human, the species that had vanished centuries ago after being deemed too primitive for galactic society. Zexon's tactical officer stared at her displays in disbelief. "Sir," she whispered, "the computer confirms it. Those are human vessels, but the designs, they're nothing like the ships in our historical records." What Zexon saw next would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The human fleet moved, like a single living organism, their ships flowing through space in patterns that seemed to dance rather than fight. Captain Neris' squadron led the charge, her vessels splitting and rejoining in formations that defied every tactical manual ever written. The Void Swarm, programmed to analyze and counter enemy strategies, turned their attention to these newcomers. Their dark ships repositioned, expecting to quickly dispose of what their computers classified as primitive technology. Instead, they flew straight into hell. The human ships unleashed weapons that shouldn't have existed. Quantum disruption fields tore through the swarm's adaptive shielding like tissue paper. Energy beams that pulsed in seemingly random patterns somehow predicted exactly where the enemy would move, striking targets before they'd even begun to maneuver. "How are they doing this?" Zexon's weapons officer gasped as they watched human fighters weave between swarm dreadnoughts, landing precision strikes on weak points that their own sensors couldn't even detect. The most shocking part wasn't the weapons or the tactics. It was the way the humans fought. They moved with absolute confidence, as if they'd fought this exact battle 1,000 times before. Every maneuver was perfect, every shot calculated, every formation shift timed to perfection. Within 2 hours, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The unstoppable Void Swarm found themselves being systematically torn apart by ships they'd dismissed as outdated relics. The supposedly primitive humans were winning a battle that the galaxy's greatest military minds had declared impossible. Admiral Zexon could only watch in stunned amazement as humanity announced their return to the galaxy. The temporary ceasefire allowed both fleets to regroup and repair battle damage. Captain Sue stood in the main briefing room of the alien flagship, surrounded by species she'd only seen in ancient history files. The Xanthari, with their 6 eyes, the crystalline Valkyrie, the insectoid Kresh, all watching her with mixtures of curiosity and amazement. "Your formation patterns saved my squadron," Admiral Zexon admitted, his scaled hide still showing stress. Marks from the battle. When my ships followed your lead through that asteroid field, we lost half as many vessels as projected. Captain Su nodded respectfully. Your people's sensor technology is incredible. We've been fighting blind for centuries, but your ships see things our scanners miss completely. Together, we're much stronger than apart. The collaboration hadn't been easy at first. Human communication styles were direct and informal, which confused aliens used to elaborate diplomatic protocols. Human tactical thinking was chaotic and unpredictable, clashing with the orderly military doctrines the galaxy had developed over millennia, but it worked. Ambassador Kethera approached during a lull in the planning session, her expression puzzled. Captain, I must ask something that's been troubling me. When humans were expelled from the Council 3 centuries ago, your technology was primitive. Your ships were slow, your weapons weak, your tactics, forgive me, but they were considered crude. Lieutenant Bora, who was updating alien weapon systems with human modifications, looked up from her work with a grim smile. We were primitive, Ambassador. You weren't wrong about that. Then how? Kethera gestured toward the tactical displays, showing human ships outmaneuvering void swarm vessels with apparent ease. How did you become this effective so quickly? 300 years isn't quickly, Bora replied, returning to her modifications. And we had one big advantage. We knew exactly what enemy we were preparing to fight. The truth was both simpler and more complex than the aliens imagined. When humanity had been forced into exile, their greatest minds had turned to a disturbing question. What threat could possibly unite the galaxy's diverse species against them? The answer had come from deep space observations and ancient archaeological evidence. The Void Swarm wasn't new. They'd attacked the galaxy before, in cycles spanning millions of years. Each time, the surviving species had rebuilt, grown complacent, and forgotten the lessons of the past. But humans had access to those ancient records, hidden in archaeological sites the Council had dismissed as unimportant. Commander Dan's engineering teams worked tirelessly, teaching alien crews to modify their weapons with human countermeasures. The modifications weren't just technological, they were psychological. Human tactics were designed to be unpredictable, because the swarm's artificial intelligence learned by finding patterns. Every time they adapt to one of our strategies, we have 17 backup plans ready, Commander Dan explained to a group of alien officers. We've been running combat simulations against swarm tactics for 3 centuries. We know how they think, because we've studied every historical encounter. The Void Swarm's greatest strength was also becoming their weakness. Their adaptive programming was designed to counter logical, predictable military doctrine, but human warfare was controlled chaos, full of seemingly irrational decisions that actually followed deeper strategic principles the swarm couldn't process. For the first time since the invasion began, the galaxy had hope. The war room aboard the massive Station New Hope buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species worked alongside human officers. Admiral Hannah stood before a holographic display that showed the entire galactic conflict, with red zones marking swarm territory and green indicating liberated systems. Fleet 7 reports successful liberation of the Altair system, announced Commander Yuki, reading from incoming transmissions. The Crichet mining colonies are secure. What amazed the alien observers wasn't just humanity's military success, but how they organized their forces. Traditional galactic military doctrine followed strict hierarchies. Orders flowed down from high command to individual ships in neat, predictable patterns. The Void Swarm had learned to counter this by targeting command vessels and disrupting communication networks. But human fleets operated differently. Captain Inho had first noticed it during the desperate battle for Centauri Station, when his communications array was destroyed early in the engagement. Instead of falling into chaos, his squadron had actually become more effective. Watch this, he explained to a group of fascinated alien officers, pulling up recorded battle footage. When my flagship lost communications, my captains didn't wait for orders. They saw what needed to be done and did it. The aliens studied the tactical display with growing amazement. Human ships moved like a school of fish or a flock of birds, each individual making independent decisions that somehow created perfect group coordination. There was no single point of failure, no command structure to disrupt. But how do you maintain unity without central control? Asked General Vexter, his insectoid features clicking with confusion. Captain Inho smiled. We share the same basic principles and training. Every human captain knows our overall strategy, understands our tactical philosophy, and trusts their fellow humans to make good decisions. We don't need someone telling us what to do every second. The Void Swarm's artificial intelligence was struggling with this concept. Their programming was designed to analyze enemy command structures, predict decision patterns, and target leadership nodes. But humans didn't have leadership nodes in the traditional sense. Every ship captain was empowered to make tactical decisions. Every squadron leader could adapt strategies on the fly. Admiral Hannah coordinated overall strategy, but she wasn't issuing detailed orders to individual ships. Instead, she set broad objectives and trusted her people to figure out how to achieve them. This created a command system that was both flexible and resilient. Cut off one part, and the rest continued fighting effectively. The breakthrough came when Captain Inho realized what was happening to the swarm itself. Their hive mind is overloading, he reported during a strategy meeting. They're trying to process thousands of individual decision makers as if we were one giant computer network. But we're not. We're thousands of thinking beings making independent choices. Ambassador Cathero watched human and alien crews working together in the station's corridors, finally understanding what her people had missed centuries ago. The humans weren't primitive, they were organic. They brought chaos, unpredictability, and individual creativity to a galaxy that had become too orderly, too predictable. They were exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The final assault began. At precisely 0600 Galactic Standard Time, across 17 different star systems, Admiral Mina stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, watching as the largest combined fleet in galactic history moved into attack formation. 300 years of preparation had led to this single moment. All units report ready, announced Lieutenant Commander Sujin from the communications station. Humans Anthari, Kresh, and Valkyrie fleets are in position. The sight was breathtaking. Thousands of ships from dozens of different species moved together in perfect harmony. Human vessels with their sleek silver hulls flew alongside the crystalline formations of Valkyrie dreadnoughts and the insectoid swarm patterns of Kresh fighters. What had started as a desperate alliance had become something beautiful, a truly united galactic force. But the most dangerous mission fell to Captain June and his hand-picked volunteers. The swarm's core processing center was buried deep in the heart of enemy territory, protected by layers of automated defenses and surrounded by their most powerful vessels. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Captain, are you certain about this? Admiral Mina asked during the final briefing. We could find another way. June shook his head, his expression calm but determined. Someone has to go, Admiral, and humans are good at impossible missions. His ship Defiance would lead a mixed formation of volunteers, humans, aliens, anyone brave enough to face certain death for the chance to end this war. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Void swarmed through everything they had at the attacking fleets, their dark ships emerging from hidden bases throughout the contested systems. Space lit up with energy weapons and missile trails as billions of combatants fought for the survival of civilization itself. It was Commander Yeji who made the difference. When the Defiance took critical damage during their assault on the core facility, her engineering team stayed behind to manually overload the ship's quantum cores. The explosion wouldn't just destroy them, it would create a cascade reaction. That would cripple the swarm's central intelligence. Get the alien survivors to safety, she ordered her remaining crew members. That's an order. We didn't come this far to let our allies die. Her sacrifice inspired others. Across the battlefield, human crews made similar choices. When Xanthari vessels lost their shields, human ships moved to cover them. When Kresh fighters ran out of ammunition, human supply vessels risked enemy fire to resupply them. When alien crews faced overwhelming odds, humans stayed beside them rather than retreating to safety. The effect was electric. Alien warriors who had fought defensively for months suddenly found themselves charging into battle, alongside humans who seemed to view death as just another tactical option. The combined fleet's morale soared even as casualties mounted. Then something unprecedented happened. The Void Swarm's perfect coordination began to break down. Their hive mind, designed to process orderly military actions, couldn't handle the chaotic mix of sacrifice, heroism, and unpredictable human decision-making. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient enemies started making mistakes. And when they did, the galaxy struck back with everything they had. The final explosion was visible across 3 star systems. The Void Swarm's central core collapsed in a brilliant cascade of quantum fire that painted the darkness of space in shades of blue and gold. For a moment, that seemed to last forever. The ancient machines that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia simply ceased to exist. Admiral Tay watched from the bridge of humanity's flagship Humanity's Answer as the last swarm vessels drifted, powerless through space. Without their hive mind to guide them, they were nothing more than empty metal shells. The threat that had consumed entire civilizations was finally over. Admiral reported Communications Officer Lee, her voice filled with amazement. We're receiving surrender signals from the remaining swarm units across all 17 systems. Their central intelligence is completely offline. The aftermath was surreal. Debris fields stretched across vast distances, marking the locations of battles that had decided the fate of every living being in the galaxy. But among the wreckage, rescue ships from dozens of different species worked together to save survivors and begin the long process of rebuilding. 3 days later, Admiral Tay found herself standing in the same council chambers where humanity had been expelled 3 centuries earlier. But this time, the assembled representatives weren't voting to cast humans out. They were offering them leadership positions, colony rights, and full membership in galactic society. The Galactic Council formally extends its deepest gratitude to humanity, announced Chairman Velthor, his voice carrying across chambers filled with representatives from 47 different species. Your courage and sacrifice have saved us all. Captain Jun, representing the human fleet commanders, stood to respond. Her words were simple but carried the weight of 3 centuries of exile and pain. Honored representatives, we appreciate your gratitude, but the truth is, we never really left. We were just waiting in the wings, preparing for the day you would need us. The silence that followed was profound. Every being in that chamber understood the magnitude of what had happened. Humanity had spent 300 years in exile, building fleets and developing strategies, not for revenge or conquest, but for this exact moment when the galaxy would need their help. Ambassador Kasara, now officially serving as humanity's primary liaison to the Council, watched the ceremony with deep emotion. She thought about the desperate moment when she'd suggested contacting the primitive humans, and how that decision had saved everything later. Walking through the rebuilt stations that orbited the Council capital, she smiled at a sight that would have been impossible just months earlier. Human children played alongside young Xanthari, Kresh hatchlings, and Valkyrie crystallites. They laughed in different languages, but somehow understood each other perfectly. The galaxy had learned a painful but valuable lesson about judging others. Humanity's greatest strength hadn't been their advanced weapons or brilliant tactics. It had been something much simpler and more powerful: their refusal to abandon people in need, even people who had once abandoned them. The stars were safe again, and after 3 centuries of wandering in the darkness, humanity had finally come home.